Great.
Thank you, Michelle.
Great, thanks.
All right, go ahead, Terry.
Okay, why get this? Oops, wrong thing. No, that's the right one. Sorry, it's just small on my screen. So first off, I'm going to talk in double speed, and for those of you who know me, I talk quickly anyway. But there's nothing like being the last speaker before you've been sitting for 9 hours, and there's drink and food waiting for you on the other side. But I just want to make a comment. If you thought people were perhaps not paying attention during Michelle's talk, 163 visitors right now went to DDRX with 731 page views. So thanks very much. You haven't crashed our system, working, but today was the soft rollout. So I just want to be clear about that. And so we're very excited. Okay, let me put this in presentation mode and I'll start. Okay, so again, I'm going to go a little quicker than I would have liked because I am conscious of the time, and Marilyn just interrupt me because I can always stop. So I'm talking today about ClinPGx and the clinical genome resource. As you can see over here, maybe you can't see the screen, I don't know. PharmGKB, CPIC, PharmCat, DDRX, that's all going into ClinPGx. I'm going to explain that, and I'm going to talk about the relationship between ClinGen, ClinPGx, and ClinVar. So I'm sort of really looking at, I want to say we're looking into the future, but the reality is the future is here now. So you've heard today about a lot of things that have gone on over time. I actually do know the timeline because I started PharmGKB on April 1st, 2000 with Russ Altman. But to give you a sense of where we've gotten, PharmGKB started in 2000, CPIC started around 2009, actually had an ASHG meeting, interestingly enough, in Hawaii. We started PharmCat, Marilyn and I started this discussion in 2015. PharmVar started with Andrea in a discussion around that, slightly after that. 2020, we established a formal partnership between ClinGen, PharmGKB, and CPIC. I forgot to mention, ClinGen actually started back in 2014. At that time, Russ and I put out a broad message on PharmGKB saying, anyone who's applying for a grant for ClinGen, we will work with whomever. ClinGen does not need to deal with drugs. PharmGKB has that covered. And so, in fact, ClinGen has been focused on disease, and PharmGKB and all the assorted things that we are doing with it have fallen in a different realm. However, in 2021 or 2020, I also became a PI on the ClinGen grant. And that started our group thinking about things differently. And in fact, the picture that Michelle showed was actually not just I wish we had that many people working on PGX. We do not. That also shows the team of the ClinGen folks as well. Our group is known as the Gecko Group for Gene Curation and Knowledge. And it does require a lot of people. But at any rate, we conceptualized this idea of ClinPGx, basically a sibling to ClinGen. And in addition to that, PharmGKB at that same time also developed APIs to obtain data from PharmVar so that we can integrate across all the resources. Not mentioned here also is we also created the database at that time for CPIC, which has helped the implementation process. In about 2022, we really have begun the transition to ClinPGx, and we also established the ClinGen PGX working group. CPIC and PharmCat got merged into one grant in 2023 per NHGRI's request. And 2024, as of actually yesterday, we released the DNA-driven prescribing app, mobile platform. And sorry, Michelle, it wasn't huge amounts of funding from Google. I wish it was, but it was enough to get us started. And now as we're looking ahead, it's really ClinPGx. We are not taking over anybody. Everything's being integrated together. And the goal is to bridge it with ClinGen. I note right here with respect to Andrea, we'll keep the APIs going to PharmVar. It's unclear what that relationship will be. That's up to Andrea to decide, but we consider integral to that. This just shows you a formal picture of the unified resource as we see it with genomic medicine and how it relates to ClinGen and how ClinVar, remember, ClinVar is the database, right? ClinGen is where we're defining the clinical relevance. People often mix those things up, so it's important to know the difference. And this is sort of the ecosystem that we talk about in terms of ClinPGx. This is just a nice pictorial to give you an idea of what ClinPGx really covers. We all think about knowledge coming in. It's a variety of knowledge. There are a variety of tools. We use computational assisted tools, knowledge extraction, human extraction. Many of you know many of our scientists. Expert and community curation. That is one of the places we're going. I'm not going to talk about it today, but we are going to be expanding, building upon, and using sort of the ClinGen model of community curators, because it's very clear that with the amount of knowledge that's out there right now, we cannot keep up with our limited staff. From that, we have knowledge generation. We also work with Roxana Danjou. We're working in the area of AI kinds of things to also help with this. And we come up with evidence-based assertions, clinical implementation and strategy. Michelle mentioned briefly that we are implementing at Stanford so that we have an end-to-end solution where in the genomics, clinical genomics lab led by Stuart Scott, all the way through into EPIC, we are in the process of building all that. And again, we see the ClinPGx users as all of these individuals. So this is the ClinPGx homepage. It is only a single page at the moment. We had to get something up mostly because of this meeting, because again, the branding is starting. Again, it's very important that people understand that we are just putting things into a single resource. It allows us to have one database rather than having to keep up 3 different databases, 3 different websites. It just makes life a lot smoother. And so if you're interested, it's there, look at that. One of the things, the first thing we did for transition, as Michelle alluded to, is the PharmGKB blog. Part of that was because we wanted to change the actual infrastructure we were using for the blog. So that has now changed. We transitioned on June 14th, and we now welcome you, and we're pleased to welcome you to the ClinPGx blog that has just come out. And interestingly enough, as of this morning, I want you to look at this, June 20th, 24. Great news, the transition to the new ClinPGx blog is a fantastic step forward, blah, 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 blah. So you can have a variety of newsletters from there. You can look at things from CPEC, FarmCat, FarmWare. You can be much more specific. So we're very excited by that. We hope we're not breaking anything. We haven't broken it yet, but that doesn't mean it won't happen. But if something does happen, feedback@farmgkb.org, and someone will get back to you. So how should you really be thinking about ClinPGx? We want you to start thinking about it kind of like you think about the Google suite of programs, right? There's Gmail, there's the calendar, there's maps, there's blah, 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 blah. There's a bunch of them listed on the left side of the screen. Same thing is going to be true on ClinPGx. Think about it as a suite that has a lot of programs. It'll have the CPEC content. It has FarmCat. It'll have DDRX. It's powered by FarmGKB. There's be a whole section on educational resources. We have educational resources actually on FarmGKB, but this is where we think we can also help disseminate more from others. Others can put their stuff there as well. So for example, the ISCC that Phil and Rose lead, there's a lot of materials being developed there. That's an opportunity to disseminate that. We've talked about, for example, having credentialed continuing education stuff there. So we'll see. One of the other things that we think is really important is we're going to move to a single sign-on. And the reason for that, think of it as like a key. That means if you take data, you take something from the ClinPGx world, we won't necessarily know the data that you've taken, but it will be marked as such as ClinPGx. Why is this important? Because we don't keep track of users, we're not allowed to, it's very hard to demonstrate use, but we will be able to demonstrate how much the data is used. And that's critically important as we look ahead, particularly in terms of funding. So as I said, ClinPGx, knowledge tools, educational materials, videos, AI generated information, et cetera. And this is the way to think about it. So again, we are moving into the world. NHGRI, thank you again to Terry. I think she's out of the room at this point. She had to catch a train, Manolio. We are under the in NHGR genome medicine. It became very clear about 5 years ago that from NHGRI's perspective that we had to sort of merge all of these different resources. We also had to come up with a way that made it more facile and easier to have funding. It's very difficult to write 3 grants at the same time and have them due. And so we came up with the concept when we put in the PharmGKB grant a couple of years ago of ClinPGx. And the idea being, again, that it's the sibling to ClinGen and ClinVar. And it integrates all the information that we've been talking about. And so that's the plan, and we're sticking to it. Now, for those of you who are not aware of ClinGen, it is considered sort of the counterpart of PharmGKB, but on the disease side. Why genomic medicine split so many years ago into disease and drugs is a little unclear, but they are definitely held to different standards, and they are not, people don't think of them as together. We are hoping that by going in this route, that as people think in the future, maybe 2030, I don't know, you have to understand, I'm the one in 2000 thought everyone would be sequenced. So you can't trust my opinion. But my point being that it's important that when people think of genomic medicine, pharmacogenomics is part of that. And that's where we're moving to. So very similar to what PharmGKB does, they aggregate information, they curate it, they disseminate it, and the goal is to improve patient care. This, I referred to the partnership. This is if you were on the ClinGen website, this is what you would get. And if you clicked on it, you would see links both to CPIC and PharmGKB. We did that on purpose because we were very concerned that if they were to take in the information, it would not get updated. That's high priority for all of us in this field. If you are delivering clinical information, it has to be up to date. And it is so easy for information to be out of date. It becomes a problem. So links are the right way to do it. So again, why are these in the same conversation? Well, I don't know if Terry's still in the room since I'm not there, and I'm sorry I'm not there. Just like I'm sorry the rest of my team wasn't able to show up. The reality is they're in the same conversation because that's the path forward to keep us funded. That's the path forward to keep CPIC funded. That's the path forward to keep PharmGKB PGX funded. And that was the driving force. Now, having said that, it also makes sense scientifically, and it makes sense from the medical care system. So the integration of PGX resources and ClinGen, this means the following: development of ClinPGx. That is not a small task. I don't want you to think that this is easy to do. It means creating a whole new knowledge base. It means creating all new systems. It means that once we put everything together, we have to go back and recurate. So a lot of work involved. We reinstituted the ClinGen PGX working group. I say reinstituted because actually back in 2015, there was a PGX working group, and several of you in the audience, including myself, were on that group, and we argued why this is worthless. There is no reason to have this at that point. There was no reason. CPIC was doing evidence review, PharmGKB was doing annotations and doing everything we do. Wasn't necessary. Now it is necessary because we have to get to a point of common language, common frameworks. And so this PGX working group has been established. And we've done several things, and which I'll talk about briefly, including surveying the community, figuring out the differences and similarities between ClinGen and PGX, and getting broad participation in this group. And so we've presented more than we'd like to have to have presented, but to the both to the ClinGen Steering Committee, the ClinGen Steering Committee and their External Scientific Board, and of course, the ClinGen PGX Scientific Advisory Board. I will say that we've had separate scientific advisory boards for CPIC and for PharmGKB, and obviously PharmVar has its own SAB, but we're sort of merging all those except for the PharmVar one at this time. This is just to give you a sense of when I presented at the ClinGen Steering Committee and ESP, Jonathan Berg pulled me aside and said, oh, remember, these people don't really know PGX. Oh my God, this is so in line with what ClinGen does. Gene drug validity, variant classification, actionability. Oh, you could use the existing PGX resources, PharmGKB and CPIC. Not a surprise to us, was a surprise to them. But it was very nice to have that conversation, which I wasn't expecting. So, as I said, integral to genomic medicine, We know the clinical utility of PGX is established. You've heard it all day long. The integration is really critical if we really do want to achieve personalized medicine. Again, remember, PGX is individualized medicine. It is not the same as population-based medicine. It differs greatly from disease genomics models because of haplotypes and diplotypes rather than individual variants. That is a big deal, and it requires specialized resources. But we really have to move away from having these different resources. As an example, people will go to the CPIC website looking for how to use extended dosing guidelines. Well, guess what? That's PharmGKB. That's not CPIC. They go to the CPIC website. Oh, CPIC has videos. No, CPIC doesn't have videos on the website. PharmGKB has videos on the website. And so this confusion makes it very difficult for the population at large. And hence, that's why moving forward. This is just a screen grab of the PGX working group members. It's on the line. If you do a search for PGXWG and ClinGen, you'll see everybody involved. Many of the people you know from the PGX side, many of the people you may not know from the ClinGen side, they're all there. We meant it to be inclusive. And so this is where we are now, integrating with ClinGen. We had the partnership. We started this dialogue in summer 2022. And so we have started. That's my point. This is not in the future. We're doing data harmonization with things that are going on in ClinGen. We've been working on batch submission of PGX variants to ClinVar. The PGX working group has been extremely busy doing an assessment, a survey development, which is done, and I'm only going to show you one thing. There'll be a paper coming out, and we're actively working on gene drug clinical validity and then actionability. We have people on the VSEPs, or variant curation expert panels, in ClinGen, as well as the gene ones, and we're developing new tools, for example, on HLA. So we did a needs assessment, 159. I have to go faster because you guys want to get out in a minute. We did a survey. You'll see that come in publication. This should not be a surprise to people what the leading resources are for PGX and the frequency which they are used. And we had 851 respondents, so we were very pleased with that. The question is, how do you integrate these disparate resources? The way you do that is by building common language, common standards. PharmGKB and CPIC and PharmVar are standard-based. PGX has used standards for 20 years. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But what it doesn't do is necessarily align with ClinGen. You have to, because ClinGen is dependent on the ACMG rules of benign and pathogenic, doesn't work for pharmacogenomics. So we're working very hard on doing that and creating a more intuitive terminology for the clinical genetics community. Remember, part of our problem is we need to reach physicians. We need to reach clinical labs. We need to reach patients. So we have to work on that. So gene drug validity and actionability, this is really what we're about. There's a paper that has just recently been submitted that describes this group, and it'll be blogged on the ClinPGx site when it comes out. And in that, it'll describe more of that evidence. For the gene drug clinical validity, it really is, how do we do it? It's coming up with a framework similar to a framework that we use for clinical annotations for evaluating the evidence on PharmGKB or evaluating the evidence for CPIC. So we have to have something that is analytical and that can be compared and can be considered a gold standard. This is just a draft that Li Gong actually had put together for the working group having to do with CYP2D6. And again, you can see how it's a point-based system, and you can see very clearly the kinds of information that we are taking in together, CPIC, TPWG, the FDA, et cetera. This is just the curation workflow as to how we get to gene drug validity. And the goal is the same as one would expect. It's to get to expert review and group consensus and publication. So these frameworks that we're aligning with, that's where we're building. We have to get to standardization. The barrier for implementation is standardization. Make no mistake about it. We've learned more about that at Stanford in the recent 6 months as we're implementing there. And it has to be uniform. That's the problem. So unlike many communities, PGX is really good at sharing information. So there's really great promise in the future. There are a lot of us working on this, sharing information, not just what the genomic indicators are or what the BPAs should be what information should be going to the patients. The fact that we can share it is helping all of us. And I think that that's a huge incentive for everyone. The long-term benefits, I believe you all know of why PGX is there. Hopefully in a very brief time, I've showed you why it is worth having ClinPGx and having everything under that implementation umbrella. And then lastly, because I really do talk fast on purpose, I really want to thank NIH. I got to be clear. This PharmacoGKB started in 2000 under NIGMS. We moved to NHGRI. They have been a huge supporters of us, even though in the beginning I don't think they necessarily wanted to, but they have embraced us quite well, and they really see the value, particularly as we move towards ClinGen, and I think that that's really important. So particularly given where we are in society, please thank them. And also going back to something that Christine said, write your Congress people, because they're trying to cut NIH's budget, and that's coming. And if NIH's budget gets cut, we're all screwed. That's just my own opinion. Lastly, I really need to acknowledge Kelly and her team, Marilyn and her team, and Andrea in PharmVar, and of course, Michelle, our group at Stanford. And what you guys aren't expecting, if Meg and Mona are, please thank them. Marilyn's team has been exemplary in getting this program going. They were exemplary when we couldn't get on the plane last night. It was a holiday yesterday for them. Meg made it possible so that Michelle and I could present today. We are very grateful. I'm sorry that we're not there with you. We hope you have a great time without us. And thank you very much.